There's something most people never question because it feels too uncomfortable to admit. They say they want success. They visualize it. They work toward it. They think about how different life would be if things finally worked out. And yet, when success gets close, not imagined, not hoped for, but possible, something inside them tightens. They hesitate. They overthink. They delay. They lose momentum. And they don't understand why. Because failure feels obvious. Failure makes sense. But success? Success feels like the goal. So why does it create resistance? Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. Your identity is far more familiar with failure than it is with success. Failure has a script. Failure has expectations. Failure has emotional routines you know how to survive inside. Success doesn't. Success removes excuses. It removes familiar struggles. It removes the version of you that knew how to cope, justify, explain, and endure. And that's where resistance begins. Not because you don't want success, but because success threatens the identity you've learned how to be. Most people believe they fear failure, but what they actually fear is becoming someone they don't yet recognize. Someone without the old problems. Someone without the old explanations. Someone without the old emotional armor. That unfamiliarity feels dangerous to a system designed to prioritize safety over growth. So the resistance appears quietly, not as panic, not as fear, but as logic. This isn't the right time. I need to prepare more. I don't want to rush things. Let me slow down and think. And because those thoughts sound reasonable, they're rarely questioned. But what's really happening is not a lack of readiness, it's identity preservation. Your nervous system is asking a simple question: who will I be if this works? And if there's no clear answer, if success doesn't feel emotionally familiar, the system pulls you back to what it knows. This is why people can endure struggle for years, but feel destabilized by progress. This is why some people unconsciously sabotage momentum right when things begin to change. And until you understand this mechanism, success will always feel like something you must push toward instead of something you can safely receive. There's a reason this resistance feels invisible. To see it clearly, you have to understand how identity actually forms and what it's designed to protect. To understand why your identity resists success, you have to understand how identity is formed in the first place. Identity isn't built from what you want. It's built from what you've lived through, from what you've repeated, from what you've survived, from what your nervous system learned was predictable enough to manage. Most people didn't grow up rehearsing success. They rehearsed adaptation, adapting to stress, adapting to uncertainty, adapting to disappointment, adapting to responsibility without reward. And over time, those adaptations harden into identity. You don't consciously say, I am someone who struggles, but your system learns, this is familiar, this is manageable, this is survivable. Success, on the other hand, doesn't come with rehearsals. There's no emotional muscle memory for it, no reference point for being seen without armor, being responsible without pressure, receiving without bracing, moving forward without resistance. So when success approaches, your nervous system doesn't interpret it as opportunity. It interprets it as uncertainty, and uncertainty is treated as risk. This is why success often triggers overthinking instead of clarity, delay instead of momentum, self-doubt instead of confidence. Not because something is wrong, but because your system hasn't learned how to exist inside success yet. Here's the part most people never realize. Failure is emotionally predictable. Success is emotionally undefined. Failure allows you to stay who you were. Success asks you to become someone else. And identity always resists what it doesn't yet recognize as safe. So the resistance you feel is not a flaw in your character. It's a signal that your external progress has moved faster than your internal familiarity. And when that happens, the system attempts to slow things down, not to punish you, not to sabotage you, but to restore coherence. Because coherence, even painful coherence, feels safer than expansion without a map. This is why people can stay stuck for years without feeling destabilized, but feel deeply uncomfortable during periods of rapid growth. The problem isn't success. The problem is that success arrived before your identity was ready to hold it. And until that gap is addressed, progress will always feel fragile. Once you see resistance this way, you stop trying to eliminate it and start listening to what it's protecting. That's where the real shift begins. Here's what's actually happening in the moment success begins to feel uncomfortable. It isn't fear in the way most people think of fear. It's not panic. It's not self-doubt. It's something quieter. Your body starts scanning for instability. Because success changes your environment, your expectations, your relationships, and your internal rules. And your nervous system's job is not to help you grow. Its job is to keep you regulated. So when success introduces variables your system hasn't learned to regulate yet, it sends a signal. That signal often shows up as tension in the chest, restlessness, mental noise, a sudden urge to slow down, a feeling that something is off even when things are going well. And because the mind doesn't like uncertainty, it rushes to explain that sensation. So it creates a story. Maybe this isn't right. Maybe I'm not ready. Maybe I should wait. Maybe I'm missing something important. But the story isn't the cause. The sensation comes first. This is where most people get stuck. They try to think their way out of a bodily response. They argue with it. They override it with motivation. They push harder. And that works briefly until the system pushes back harder. Because from the nervous system's perspective, sudden expansion without familiarity feels the same as danger. Not logically, physiologically. This is why progress can feel energizing one moment and exhausting the next. Your identity hasn't failed. Your willpower hasn't weakened. Your system is simply asking, can we stay safe here? And if the answer is unclear, it defaults to what has felt safe before. Old patterns, old pacing, old limitations. Not because they were good, but because they were known. This is why awareness alone doesn't dissolve resistance. You can understand everything intellectually and still feel pulled backward emotionally. Because resistance doesn't respond to insight. It responds to felt safety. Once you see this, you stop judging the resistance. You stop labeling it as self-sabotage. And you start recognizing it as a signal that your internal capacity hasn't caught up to your external progress yet. And that realization changes the entire approach. Because instead of forcing yourself forward, you begin expanding your capacity to stay, to remain present in unfamiliar success without retreating. And that's where change becomes stable, not because you pushed through discomfort, but because your system learned it didn't need to pull you back anymore. When resistance stops being something you fight and starts becoming something you understand, it loses its power to control you. And what replaces it is not effort, but steadiness. If resistance is a signal, then the question becomes simple. How do you respond to it without shrinking your life or forcing yourself forward? The answer is not more effort. It's not discipline. It's not positive thinking. It's not pushing through discomfort. It's integration. Integration is the process of teaching your system that a new level of success does not require the old level of tension. Most people try to earn success by tightening themselves around it. They hold their breath. They stay hypervigilant. they brace, and in doing so, they accidentally prove to their nervous system that success really is unsafe. Because every time progress arrives, it's paired with pressure. So the system learns, this costs too much. Integration works in the opposite direction. Instead of asking, how do I become more driven, you ask, how do I become more regulated inside what I'm building? This means learning how to stay present without rushing, move forward without urgency, hold responsibility without contraction, let things work without monitoring them constantly. At first, this feels unnatural because you've been trained to associate growth with stress. But safety isn't created by slowing down your goals. It's created by slowing down your internal response to expansion. This is where identity begins to update, not through declarations, not through affirmations, but through experience. Each time you allow yourself to remain calm inside progress, your system learns something new. It learns, this level is survivable. This pace is manageable. This version of me is allowed. And gradually, success stops feeling like something you must control. It starts feeling like something you can inhabit. This is the missing step for most people. They change their habits. They change their thinking. They change their goals. But they never change how their body relates to growth. So even when they move forward, they never feel settled there. Integration is what turns temporary progress into a new baseline. It's the moment your identity stops chasing success and starts living from it. And once that happens, resistance doesn't disappear. It simply loses its authority. Because your system no longer needs to pull you back to feel safe. When success no longer requires tension, it stops feeling fragile. And what becomes possible then is a version of growth that doesn't demand sacrifice, only alignment. When you understand why your identity resists success, and you stop trying to overpower that resistance, something subtle begins to change. You stop treating growth like a test. You stop measuring yourself every step of the way. You stop asking whether you're doing it right. You stop bracing for the moment it might fall apart. And in that space, success begins to stabilize. Not because you finally figured everything out, but because you're no longer asking your system to survive expansion alone. This is the shift most people never reach. They either stay stuck in struggle because it feels familiar, or they touch success briefly, only to retreat back to what feels emotionally safe. But there's a third path, a path where success no longer feels like a peak you're afraid to fall from. It feels like ground. That happens when your identity updates not through force, but through repetition without pressure. You show your system again and again that progress doesn't require urgency, that responsibility doesn't require contraction, that visibility doesn't require armor. And slowly, the version of you that once resisted success no longer recognizes it as a threat, not because it disappeared, but because it learned. This is how people stop cycling. They don't become more motivated. They don't become more disciplined. They don't become more intense. They become more stable. And stability is what allows success to last. Because success isn't sustained by effort. It's sustained by identity. When your identity no longer needs struggle to feel grounded, you stop recreating it. When your system learns that growth doesn't cost safety, it stops pulling you back. And from that place, progress becomes quieter, less dramatic, less exhausting, more consistent. Not because you're trying harder, but because you're no longer fighting yourself. That's when success stops feeling like something you have to reach for and starts feeling like something you can remain inside.